Last week, Apple finally got around to launching the much anticipated, at least for me, update to Swift Playground. With this update, they promised bringing sort of an Xcode mini to the iPad. And this allows us to write real code on our iPad and also publish apps directly to the App Store. It's really a huge update in a move that I hope is just the beginning for what can possibly be done with writing apps on this device. So with this release, I decided to challenge myself to see how possible GameDev can be on an iPad. Swift Playgrounds is limited to SwiftUI right now, which is Apple's framework that's built on top of Swift primarily to create apps. It's not SpriteKit. And that means from a game dev perspective, the only games you can really create are very small, very simple games. And that's what I'm going to do today for you. So let's get into SwiftUI and into Swift Playgrounds and take a look at what's possible. And if you have other ideas for apps that you think I could create, leave a comment below and let me know what you think. I'll see you in the code in a second. All right, guys, so once you've got Swift Playgrounds downloaded, you're going to be able to open the app and just hop right into creating your whatever you have in your head. You just launch an app and it will automatically give you an app name and a placeholder icon. So it's called Fast Math. And if you followed my channel, you know I'm a sucker for numbers games. So yes, it is going to be a numbers game. I'm going to give it a calculator for its placeholder icon. Now we can be off to the races. So the first step here is going to be to create our main menu. And this is just so that we have a place for the game to launch. So I'm going to change my initial view here from content view. I'm going to call this main menu. And when I do that, I also changed my struct to main menu, and I have to change my app view to load main menu instead of content view. So now that we have this open, what I can do is open our preview. And this is one of the cool things about SwiftUI. We can see our game come to life in front of us. We don't have to keep launching a simulator or anything. It's going to come to life right in front of us here. So what we can do is start very simply and just build our very basic menu to launch this game. And it's going to be really a couple of items. We just want the title of the game and a button so that we can go to the game view, which we'll create in a minute. So this is all going to be wrapped in what is called the navigation view. And this is what allows us to navigate between the two views that we're going to use in this game. And inside this view, we're going to create a VStack. A VStack is basically think of it like building blocks, right? You have different UI elements, and whatever is at the top of your stack will be at the top of your UI. And then as you add more, they kind of space evenly throughout your screen. So you'll see this come to life here as I build it up. So we're going to have a text, which is going to be Fast Math. That's our title. And you can see in the preview on the right-hand side, it happens instantly there. We're going to add some modifiers to this. So we're going to have a large title font so that it's nice and big. We'll give it a bold font weight so that it's even bigger. And then we'll add some padding around it so that it just has a little more space to breathe. And that will be noticeable in a second. And then the next thing we're going to do is create a button that's going to sit below our title. So we'll have a navigation link, which is what allows us to move between different views. So this is going to be to game view, which is going to be created in a second. And one of the downsides to SwiftUI for game development is that we have to work around some of the UI conveniences that Apple builds in for people building apps. And one of those is that the back button that we see in the top left-hand corner of many of our apps comes built into the navigation link. So we want to actually disable that for this purpose. So that's this long thing here, and we're going to disable that. Did I type that right? Button. And then what we're going to do is just get rid of the label here, and we're going to create what goes inside this button. So we're going to basically have an H stack, which much like a V stack is horizontal, and the items are displayed left to right on the screen. So we're going to have our H stack. We'll open this up, and then inside here we're going to have an image, which is just going to be an SF symbol, something that comes included with Xcode and is available in Swift Playgrounds, and we can just access that by doing system name and then a string, which there are tons of these, so it helps to get the Mac app and have that available so you can look up what your strings are going to be. So I'm just going to make that a little bigger, and then we'll have our text be start, and we'll do a font of title. And then let me clean this up. We're going to also give it a frame, and this frame is on the H stack, which is going to be our button. We want that to have a width of 250 and a height of 50. We'll give it a background of cyan, a corner radius to give it some nice rounded corners of 25, and a foreground color of white, And again, another thing we need to hide is the navigation bar, which is, so now, the reason this isn't loading is because we have an error. We need to create our game view. So I'm going to go create that right now. All right, so in our file navigator, we're going to hit a new Swift file here. We're going to call it game view. And then in here, we're going to create our game view, which is just another struct. It's going to look very similar to the main menu view that we just created. It's going to conform to view. And inside here, we're going to create a 3x3 grid. And this is going to be essentially our game. So now what I can do is, this is live, right? So let me just finish game view, and then this should all populate and show up. So what we need to do is create our body, so we have something to see. So we have body and then some view, and then we go like this. And if we just create a dummy text, hello, everything shows up. Now now Swift Playgrounds is happy. We have the button that we just created, and if I click on this, we come to our next view. So what we're going to do is build out GameView. GameView's going to get pretty big, and I'm not going to refactor this to be too, it's a simple game. It's a simple proof of concept. We're not going to release this or anything. So I'm just doing this very quickly just to see how it works. So we're not refactoring too much or making this too neat. I'm just going to try and go through and build what we can build. So let's first set up, the first thing we need to do is, if you remember, we have a 3x3 grid. So let's get that out of the way. So that's going to be I'm going to create some columns, and those are going to be an array of grid items, which we will define as a grid item dot. We'll use the flexible grid item, and we'll just leave it at that. And then we're going to need, because we have a 3x3 grid, we're going to need 3 of these. So I'm just going to Command C, and we'll do 3 of those. And we're also going to need a reference to our operators. Those are going to be the plus, minus, and multiply operators, and we're going to use SF symbols for that. So let's set this up too. That's just going to be an array of, we'll call them operators. And it's going to be an array of strings, because if you remember, we reference our SF symbols as a string, and we looked those up earlier. I'm going to have plus dot circle, and then we're going to have minus dot circle, and multiply dot circle. All right, so we have our 3 strings here for our operators. And then the only other thing we're really going to need to do right now to get this all up and running is set a state property called setup. And we're going to define this also as an array of strings equal to, and what we want to do is have every one of our grid squares or our grid spaces be overlaid with a number. And we're going to use SF symbols for that as well. So that's just an array of strings. And the way that I'm doing this is to give some kind of gameplay element to the game, we're going to just create a random number. So int.random, and we're going to do in 1 to 9, which gives us all of the single digit values that can be added, multiplied, or subtracted from one another. And there's a reason why I had to do single digits, and it's primarily just because of the way that we're getting the value. We're going to have to convert this into a integer, and the way that I did that was by parsing out that first digit. So you can see the first part of this SF symbol is just that value. So we'll get there in a second. So I'm just going to grab this, Command C, and we will do 1, 2, if it will let me, or we'll just close this down for a second. I just want to make sure I have this all lined up. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then the middle square, which is the 5th one, right? There's 3 and then 1 and then the 5th one. We're actually going to have it be, instead of a random number, we're going to default this to plus.circle, so that when the game loads, it's going to create numbers around your modifier, and then we'll use the array above of operators to kind of toggle between what we have. And then I just need to create some of these here to make this happy. And one here. The way Xcode works is whatever view you're working on, it shows in the preview. Swift Playgrounds doesn't do that. It shows the full app, but I think there's a workaround that I can do, which would be instead of doing main menu here, if we just say that our game is going to launch into GameView, we should hopefully be able to see the game come to life. Let's see if this works. So theoretically, and I'm trying this on the fly here because I don't like having to click the start button every time I want to see something. So let's just do text hello, just to see. Yeah. All right. So we're good to go. All right. So let's build out the basic foundation of this view. So what I'm going to do here is create first a geometry reader, which basically defines the content as a function of its own size and coordinate system. So it helps us keep things organized and spaced out the way we want to. And we're going to do it as a geometry in, and then this is just going to be like that, and then we'll have one more bracket there. So we have our geometry reader, and what I'm going to do first is create our grid items. So this is a lazy grid, a lazy V grid, and we're going to have it have columns equal to the columns that we defined above and spacing of 5. So this gives us our lazy grid, and then for each 0 to 9 for I in. So for each of our columns, we're going to create a Z stack. And I mentioned this earlier, Z stacks are basically like, if you're, think of like in Photoshop or some other image editing platform where you have different layers on top of one another, right? You're going in the Z axis. So you can create a background and then lay some font on top of that. That's what we're doing here. We're going to create our Z stack, which is going to contain a couple of elements here. So the first thing is we're going to create a circle, which is just built into Xcode. It's just a built-in function to give us circles. And we're going to give that a foreground color of .cyan. I'm going with this blue theme here. And a .frame of width. And what we want to do is kind of space this out according to the geometry that we set above. So this is going to be geometry.size.width divided by 3, because there's 3 of them. And we're going to give them a little bit of space. So we're going to subtract 15 from that, just to give it a little extra space. And then it's also going to be doing the same thing, geometry.height, or size.height. And again, divide by 3 minus 15. And I need height. All right, so that should be good. I'm getting an error. It's because something's not, oh, this, yep. All right, so now you can see we're spaced out throughout the entire grid, or the entire screen. And now we're going to use our setup function that we created earlier. We're going to say image, and we're going to do a system name because we're using those SF symbols, and we're going to say setup. And what we're going to do is for each time we go through this, we have our I, so we're just going to pull the I from that. And then we will give this resizable so that the image can be resized. We'll give it a frame of width 50, height 50. So that fits into our circles nicely. And you know, if the foreground color is defaulted to white, so we don't really need to add it, but I'll just add it just for the sake of making things, you know, complete here. Now you'll notice so we're going to need something to do. We're going to have to figure out what to do here. So what I ended up doing was I have an if statement above this, and if I is not equal to 4, then we do this. Otherwise, so basically if we have a 4, which means it's going to be the 5th one in the array because our arrays start at 0, we're going to come in and we're going to create an image, and we'll have our system name. And here we're going to create operators. For now, I'm just going to do it as 0. And we will also call this resizable. We're going to change our frame to be slightly bigger here, just to make it like pop a little more. So I'm going to do 60 instead of 50. And we're going to have a foreground color of indigo. So this is our game board starting to come together. We're going to have to create some other areas here, and we'll dive into that next. All right, so a game needs some game elements. We need some more UI. So let's get our UI kind of started here. What we're going to do is have some feedback for the player up above our lazy grid. So this is going to contain things like the goal and how much time you have and stuff like that. So let's create our VStack. And we are actually going to create 2 VStacks. So basically we have a VStack, and then we're going to have another VStack which is going to contain this lazy grid. So I'm going to make sure that we enclose. So now what we're going to do is create a text, and we'll have a timer. And for now, we're just gonna put it in here as like UI, and we'll hook it all up in a second. But I just want to make sure we have everything looking right first. So we'll have our timer be a large title. We'll give it a font rate of .heavy. That looks pretty good. And then we're going to create inside of this VStack and HStack. So we have our timer top and center, and then below that we're going to have our goal and our current value. So what do we need to achieve, and what is our current value? Those are going to be important for the player to be able to see. So we're going to create two text fields here. We have goal, and again, I'm going to create the UI first, and then we'll hook it all up with logic in a second. So we're going to do a font of title, a foreground color. Again, I don't think I need to keep putting these whites in, but it is what it is. We're going to add some padding here. Background. We're going to give these kind of a background with some rounded corners to make them just stand out a little bit, make them look more interesting. So we have that one, and then we're going to create another one, which is basically exactly the same, except different text. So I'm just going to copy and paste. We'll put that here. And this one is going to say current. And we'll just change that number there. So you can see this UI is starting to come together. A little bit of a mistake, but we're fixed. So in my geometry size.height, I should actually have this as width, I believe. It fits the screen better, right? So that was my mistake. But now we're back up and running here, and things should look a little bit better. So one thing I'm going to do is add a little bit of spacing beneath my goal and current areas here. So this is just going to be basically just some padding. And I'm going to just do, maybe we just need to go down a size here so rather than, let's just do body. The font might be just too big. So we'll stick with body for now, and we can play with it later if we want to. I just want to make sure everything's looking good here first. And then what I was going to do, so this is before we got all distracted, was to set up below our lazy grid here, padding. So I just want it on the top for now. And then I'm going to do a text box for score, which is going to be a property that we'll come up with in a second. Again, this is just getting the UI set up. And we'll give it some properties here. Font weight, .heavy. And then I'm going to put a spacer in the bottom here to help balance things out. And I think I'll put a couple more in just to balance out everything. Let's try inside this first VStack here, a spacer at the top. That just pushes everything so that it's kind of all centered. I think that looks pretty good. So spacer is just a built-in SwiftUI thing to help get everything aligned the way you want it to see. So now we have the basic UI for our game. The next thing we need to do is build our logic. The idea of the game is that you have a goal, and you have to use these numbers that are around your modifier to get your score, or your current value, to your goal. So you can add. So you'll click on a number and you'll add to whatever your current is, or you can subtract or multiply. So if you have a 20 here and you click an 8 and you have an add, you'll get 28. If you have a 20 here and you click this to multiply, or change this to multiply, then you click on 2, say you would get to 40. Make sense? Hopefully. I hope I can piece all this together and make some sense out of it in the edit. Let me know if you like this style of video, because this is a lot of work and it's not something that I normally do. But if you're enjoying this, click that like button, leave a comment, and get subscribed. I think the first thing I'm going to do is work on changing our modifier here. So if you remember, right now we hard-coded this in to just be 0, but like if I put 1 in, then it changes to the minus symbol, and if I put a 2 in, it should change to multiply, unless I spelled multiply wrong. Multiply. There we go. All right, so now what we want to do is actually give this basically a variable. So we're going to have this be operator ID. And we'll create that as a state variable. So we'll come up here and create an add state private variable operator ID, which is going to be an int. And we'll define this as 0 to start. And now we just need to create a way for us to change that. And the way that we do that is we use SwiftUI's on tap gesture. So when an element is tapped, it will basically recognize that tap. So what we do is we come down to our area here, which has this image. What we're going to do is on this image itself, so below our foreground color, we're going to create an on tap gesture. And this is going to be a function that we'll make in a second called select operator. So we'll just come down here, we're going to create a func select operator. The first thing we're going to do is create some haptic feedback for the player. So I'm going to create a variable here, let haptic equal UI impact feedback generator style. And the one that I like for this is called rigid. And then we'll say haptic dot impact occurred. And after that, we're going to say operator ID plus equals 1. And then if the operator ID is greater than 2, then we're going to basically set it back to 0. So basically, the way this works, the way this works is you come into this function, you're going to get the haptic feedback, then we're going to iterate through that array that we created at the top of the screen, where the different strings will be presented. And then if we get outside that, so if we hit 3, we actually go back to the beginning, which would be plus. So the way this works now is because we've already got this up here, we just come in here and tap to change. So that's working. All right, so we have our operator toggle selected. So now what we should do is to be able to capture the value that is associated with each of these numbers, right? Because we need to be able to know that we're tapping on a 1 or a 9. All right, so on the Z stack, which contains that circle and the number, I'm doing another on tap gesture. And this one, again, I'm going to say is, we're going to create another haptic to let them know that they've touched the box. So this is the same as before, an impact, UI impact feedback generator. And this is going to have a style dot rigid. And then haptic dot impact occurred. And then I'm going to create a number label, which equals setup at the I value for that for each that we came into. And then we're also going to create a let number value equal number label dot first dot whole number value. So let me close this out. So what we're doing here is we're getting the string that's associated with the whatever we tapped, because we're tapping on a setup. We know what's there. We're tapping on a specific thing because we're in this for each, right? So when we come in, we're tapping on whatever we tapped on. We know what it is. We get that string, and then we parse it down to the first character, and we turn that. If it is a whole number, we're going to turn it into a whole number. And because we know that it's going to be a whole number because of our array here, because we're not going to be able to do this one. It's just these ones and this one, and we know those are going to be a number 1 through 9. We can get a whole number from it. So now we have all of this. We can do a perform operation, and we're going to pass that number value into this function. So we're going to create another func. We're going to call it perform operation, and this function is going to have a number value that is coming in, and it's going to be an integer. Because it's technically an optional integer. We know it's an integer, but it's good. So then we're going to have our operation. We know what our operator ID is. It's either a 0, 1, or a 2. So if that operator ID is a 0, then our current value plus equals number value. And we can force unwrap this because we know that it's going to be a number 1 through 9. So before we can do this, we need to actually know what that current value is. I'm just going to create that up here, and then we'll hook it up in a second. But this needs to be integer. We'll set it to 0. Let's go on and hope that we have fixed all our bugs. So we're going to create an else if, and this is going to be if the operator ID is equal to 1, then current value minus equals number value. And then finally, else if operator ID equals 2, then current value equals current value times number value. So that's the logic. That's the whole thing. And then we're gonna see if that works. So first, I need to change where I'm displaying score, or the current value, I guess. We're gonna change that to current value. So that way it should update with the current value as we play. So let's see, 5, yeah, see, 8. If we subtract, we subtract. If we click on multiply, we multiply. So that's all working, so we're good there. All right, so next up on this list of things we need to do, create our win conditions. So when we get to that goal value, we need to give the player a win. And we also probably need to deal with what happens if the player uses up all their numbers and they don't get a win. And the way that I came up with that was to just set our timer to 0. So I guess the first thing I'm going to do is get our timer going and set up game over. So that's pretty simple. So let's see, I'm going to create a few different variables here that we'll use throughout the rest of our game. So I know we're going to need a goal value, and we'll just set this equal to an integer that's going to be equal to int.random, and we'll do in a range of between 20 and 40. I mean, it can be anything. We want to make sure that they're going to consistently be able to multiply, add, or subtract to that number using these 9 random numbers. So far, this range has worked out well for me. I think it probably could be a little bit higher and still be fine. I'm going to create a couple of booleans here so that we can track the state of the game. So we'll just do is game over, I guess. That's probably the simplest way to do this. And we'll just set it to false. And then if it's game over, then we'll flag that, and then game will be over. Let's see. At state private. So we'll set up some time remaining. We'll give it 30 seconds. Okay, so that's basically everything we need except for the score. The score is a separate issue. We'll deal with that in a second. And then I just need I need to put my timer in. Let timer equal timer.publish every one on dot main in dot. And I'll be honest, I got this code from the internet. It's just a way to create a quick timer, so we're counting down from, and we're going to use timer remaining in this so that we can count down from 30, and you'll see that in a second. So inside our timer, we're going to have our timer equal read time remaining, and then we're going to use a SwiftUI on receive, and we're going to have it be timer, which is what we just created. And again, this is going to just update our timer. So we're going to call this update timer function, which we will create now. So we'll come down here and we'll do function update timer. And this is pretty simple. Again, we're just going to do if time remaining is greater than 0, and time remaining minus equals 1. Else if time remaining is less than or equal to 0, we're going to say is game over equals true. So that takes care of game over. It takes care of our timer being functional now. You can see it running in the preview here. And yeah, so we're pretty good. Now what we want to do is, so I think the only other thing we really need here is to hook up our win condition, and we should pretty much have our game. Okay, so our win condition is going to happen inside our on-tap gesture. So we'll create that function there, and then we're going to come down and create a function for win condition. So function win condition. And basically, our win condition is that our goal value and our current value are the same. So we're going to say if current value equals goal value, we're going to win. And what does a win mean? So in the context of this game, what we're trying to do is score as many times as possible. So a win really just means reset the board. So we're going to say, first we're going to give us some score, which I guess this is as good a time of any to create the score class. So what we're going to do is come up here, and this is outside of our struct. We're going to create a class called score, and it's going to be an observable object. This allows SwiftUI to basically say, hey, we're going to watch this, and anytime it updates, update this thing. And we're going to have a published var, which is going to also allow us to do that, and we're going to set it to 0. So these are just a way to get things to update across different screens. And the reason we're doing this is because we're going to create a game over screen, and we want to display that player's score on the game over screen as well as on the screen that the player is playing on. So that's why we're doing it this way. All right, so now we just need to create an observed object var score, and we're going to initiate that as score. So then when we come down to our win condition, we can say score.score plus equals 1. And then what we're going to do is basically, after we do this, we're going to reset the game. Well, you know what? Since you scored, I guess it's probably nice of us to give you an extra 5 seconds so you have a little more time to score more points, incentivizing you to score points. You know, it's like a way to keep the game going. We're going to then reset the goal value, again, to a random number between 20 and 40. We're going to do a current value and reset that back to 0, and our operator ID we're going to set back to 0, so that once you score it goes back to a plus, because if you're in minus, maybe you forgot or whatever. We want to start the game off kind of the same way that we started, and that means we're also going to reset the game board. So we're just going to copy our setup function here and just paste it back in, that we're all ready to go. And we're going to get rid of this. We're just going to say that setup, so we've already defined it, so we're just going to say setup equals this thing. And let me line this up so it's more pretty to look at. All right. So that is our win condition. Now we need to handle a couple of other things. So now a couple of other things we need to handle. We need to handle what happens when the player taps on all the numbers and they don't have a win and they aren't out of time. We don't want them to sit there and wait for the timer because they can't do anything. So what we're going to do is have a function called count remaining numbers. And we're going to say var count equals 0 for I in setup. So this is all of our numbers in setup. If I dot is empty, count plus equals 1. And then we're going to say if count equals 0 and current value does not equal goal value. So basically, we don't want to have this end the game if they actually got a win on their last thing. So we're making sure that it's both 0 and they don't currently have a win. Then we're going to set time remaining equal to 0. Down here, if time remaining equals 0, then we're setting game over to true. So we're almost done. I think that might be basically everything. So let's see, can I get a win here? So 9 times 4. Oh, you know what? I need to fix that, because I don't know what our goal value actually is. It's a goal value, but it's not being displayed. Goal value. So our goal value is 37. So let's see, 8 times 5 minus 2 minus 1, 37, and we reset our board. Our score needs to be updated. So that's down here, and this is going to be score.score. Let's see here, 37, 9 times 4 plus 1, score of 1. So that's basically it. That's the game, right? So now when we get to, like, if I use up, oh, you know what we're not doing yet? Right now we can use all of these. This took me actually a while to figure out how to get rid of our value once we use it. You can see once the timer goes, we do get game over. So we have game over. The only thing I need to fix is that once we use a value, we want to get rid of it. So let me pause this and get rid of it here, and then we'll add this in so that we can our thing. And that's a very simple solution. It took me forever to figure this out. But right here on this on-tap gesture, after we perform our operation, what I do is I do setup at I, and we just set this to be blank, basically empty. So now when I come into my game, I have setup I, and I count remaining numbers. Now I get rid of these as I go. So now if I get rid of all of them and I don't have a win, it's supposed to work. I figured it out. This isn't a 0, it's an 8, because we want to make sure that we have selected 8 items and we're counting 8 times. So if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, time goes to 0. Come down here, we want to make sure, this just makes sure that we don't get an error when we click on something that is empty. Like if I take this out, what happens is you get an error if you click on a square that doesn't have a number. But if we put it in, now it doesn't matter. We're returning before we can click on that. So if it doesn't have a number, that fixes that bug. All right, guys, so that's gonna do it for this video. Here's another great one for you to watch. Again, if you liked this video, click that button and let me know. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.